Picture this. The ground is shaking beneath thousands of hooves. Dust clouds rise like smoke. Sunlight glints off armor and spear tips. The cavalry is charging, and it looks like something out of a movie. The ride of the Rohirrim. The charge of the winged hussars. Pure glory. Pure, cinematic perfection. We are obsessed with the cavalry charge. It is the most romantic image of ancient warfare. But here is the thing nobody wants to talk about. The battle ends. The smoke clears, and you are standing in a field with 20,000 dead horses. Everyone asks about the human casualties. The history books love to throw around numbers. 100,000 men died here. 50,000 fell there. We build memorials. We study the tactics. We honor the dead. But what about the horses? A horse does not get a gravestone. A horse does not get a mention in the chronicles. But a horse weighs 1,200 pounds. And when 1,200 pounds of flesh starts rotting in the summer sun, you have got a problem that makes a human corpse look like a minor inconvenience. Let me give you some perspective. A dead human body weighs about 150 pounds. It is awful. It is tragic. But you can move it. 2 men can drag a body to a burial pit without too much trouble. Now, imagine a dead horse, 8 times heavier, bloated with gas, legs stiff as timber. You cannot just pick it up. You cannot roll it into a ditch. You need a team of oxen and a lot of rope just to move one horse a few feet. Now multiply that by thousands. After a major battle, you are not looking at a cleanup job. You are looking at a biological disaster zone. And the clock is ticking. Because a dead horse does not just lie there quietly. It bloats, it leaks, it explodes, and if you do not deal with it fast, disease will kill more soldiers than the battle did. So, what did they actually do? How did ancient and medieval armies handle mountains of rotting horse flesh? The answer is more disturbing than you think, and it starts with robbery. Before anyone thought about cleanup, they thought about money. A war horse was not just an animal, it was a walking bank account. The saddle alone could cost as much as a year's wages for a common soldier. The bridle, the bit, the reins, the stirrups, if you had them. These were expensive pieces of technology. Leather was valuable. Metalwork was valuable. After every major battle, the first thing that happened was looting. Soldiers swarmed over the dead horses, just like they swarmed over dead soldiers. They stripped off every piece of gear worth taking. The army wanted its equipment back. Individual soldiers wanted anything they could sell. Before the bodies were even cold, the battlefield turned into a scavenger market. This was not just greed. This was logistics. You could not afford to leave a fortune in leather and metal rotting in a field. So the first phase of cleanup was not about the bodies at all. It was about recovering assets. Strip the gear. Collect the valuables. Inventory what you could reuse. Only then did anyone start thinking about the actual corpse. And that is when things got uncomfortable. Here is a question nobody wants to ask. Did they eat them? I know. It sounds horrible. In many cultures, eating horse meat was taboo. The Romans looked down on it. Christians associated it with pagan rituals. It was considered barbaric. But here is the reality. War makes people pragmatic. A starving army does not care about cultural taboos. Fresh meat is fresh meat. And after a battle, you suddenly have thousands of tons of it lying in a field. We have records suggesting this happened more often than anyone wants to admit. After some medieval battles, locals were given permission to butcher the dead horses. Was it charity? Maybe. Was it cleanup disguised as charity? Definitely. You let the peasants take the meat, and suddenly your disposal problem shrinks. The horse gets carved up, hauled away in pieces, and you do not have to burn or bury it. Everyone wins. Well, everyone except the horse. Some chroniclers hint at massive feasts after battles. They do not spell it out. They do not say the word horse. But when you read between the lines, It is pretty obvious what was on the menu. Even if the meat was not eaten, the horse was still valuable dead. This is where it gets really grim. A horse is not just meat. It is leather. It is glue. It is tools. It is fertilizer. Medieval people wasted nothing. The hide could be tanned into leather for tents, shoes, armor, and a dozen other things. One horse hide was a significant resource. The hooves could be boiled down into glue. Horse glue was used for everything from woodworking to bookbinding. The bones could be carved into tools, handles, or dice. Even the hair from the tail and mane had uses. It was woven into rope or used for bowstrings. So after the looters came the recyclers. Locals, camp followers, and opportunistic merchants descended on battlefields like vultures. They were not there out of respect or duty. They were there because a battlefield was a gold mine of raw materials. This process could take days or even weeks. As long as there was something worth harvesting, people kept coming back. In some cases, battlefields were picked clean so thoroughly that you would barely know a fight happened there. The horses did not just disappear. They were dismantled. Piece by piece, hide by hide. But what about the parts nobody wanted? What about the guts, the rotting flesh, the sheer bulk of decay? This is where the popular myths fall apart. A lot of people assume they just burned everything. Makes sense, right? Fire solves the problem. Burn the dead, and the disease goes away. Except burning a horse is not that simple. First, you need fuel. A lot of fuel. Burning a human body takes hours and a massive amount of wood. Burning a horse takes even longer, and even more wood. Now multiply that by thousands of horses. You would need to cut down an entire forest. And guess what? Wood was valuable. It was used for cooking, heating, building, and making charcoal. You did not just waste it on burning horse corpses, unless you absolutely had to. In cases of plague or extreme desperation, yes, they burned bodies. But most of the time, it was not an option. Some armies did try. There are records of mass pyres after major battles, but these were rare. They required planning, resources, and time. Most commanders did not have any of those. They won the battle, and now they wanted to move on. Sitting around for 2 weeks burning horses was not appealing, especially when the smell alone could make your camp unlivable. So, burning was the exception, not the rule. What about burial? Surely they just dug big pits and dumped the horses in, right? Wrong. Digging a hole big enough for one horse is hard work. Digging a pit for 5,000 horses is an engineering project. You need teams of men with shovels working for weeks. You need to dig deep enough that scavengers will not just dig them back up. And you need to transport the bodies to the pit. Remember, a dead horse weighs over half a ton. You cannot carry it. You have to drag it, with oxen, or horses, which is ironic and a little depressing. Most armies did not have the manpower or the time for mass burial. They had just fought a battle. Men were wounded. Supplies were low. Morale was shaky. The last thing a commander wanted was to tell his exhausted soldiers that they now had to spend the next month digging a giant horse cemetery. It just did not happen. In rare cases, small numbers of valuable horses might be buried with some ceremony. Royal war horses, for example, might get individual graves. But the average cavalry horse? No chance. So if they did not burn them, and they did not bury them, what did they do? The answer is simple and brutal. Most of the time, they did nothing. They stripped the valuables, harvested what they could, and then walked away. The bodies were left where they fell, and nature took over. This is the part of history that does not make it into the paintings. After the army marched off, the battlefield became a feast for scavengers. Wolves, wild dogs, foxes, ravens, crows, vultures, every carnivore and carrion eater in the region descended on the site. They had hit the jackpot. Thousands of tons of free meat. For weeks, sometimes months, these animals gorged themselves. Travelers who passed nearby reported hearing the howling and the cawing from miles away. The smell was so overpowering that people took long detours to avoid the area. These sites became known as zones of death. No one wanted to go near them. The stench lingered for months. Even after the scavengers finished, the ground was a mess of bones, rotting scraps, and bloated carcasses that nothing wanted to touch. Some battlefields were avoided for years. They became cursed places in local folklore. People said ghosts haunted them. Maybe they did. Or maybe people just did not want to admit they were scared of the smell. But here is where the story takes a strange turn. All that rotting flesh was not just gross. It was fertilizer. As the bodies decomposed, they leaked into the soil. Blood, fat, and decaying tissue are full of nitrogen and other nutrients. Plants love that stuff. Within a year or two, grass started growing back over battlefields. But it was not normal grass. It grew thicker, greener, and taller than anywhere else in the region. Farmers noticed. Chronicles from medieval Europe mentioned battlefields producing extraordinary harvests for years after major conflicts. The wheat grew higher. The grass was richer. Livestock that grazed on old battlefields got fatter, faster. It was grim, but it was real. The horses died serving their masters in war. And in death, they fed the earth. The cycle continued. This was not unique to horses. The same thing happened with human dead. But horses, because of their size, had an even bigger impact. One dead warhorse put as much organic matter into the soil as 8 men. Multiply that by thousands, and you are essentially fertilizing entire fields. Some historians argue that certain regions saw population booms after major wars, specifically because the land became more fertile. It is dark, it is disturbing. But it is also weirdly poetic. The horse gave everything. It carried its rider into battle. It charged into spear walls and arrow storms. It died in mud and blood and chaos. And then, when it was gone, it gave one last gift. It fed the wolves, it fed the birds, and eventually, it fed the earth. The grass grew taller. The wheat came in thicker. Life continued. The battlefield became a pasture. The pasture became a farm. And decades later, no one even remembered the thousands of horses that made it possible. This is the part of history we ignore. We love the charge. We love the glory. We love the paintings of noble steeds rearing up in battle. But we do not want to think about the aftermath. We do not want to picture the flies and the bloating and the scavengers. We do not want to imagine armies just walking away from mountains of rotting meat because they did not have a better option. But that is what happened. War is not clean. War is not neat. And the logistics of death are just as brutal as the battles themselves. So, the next time you watch a movie with a big cavalry charge, enjoy the moment. But remember what comes after. Remember the 1,000-pound problem. Remember the 20,000 horses lying in a field with no one to bury them. Remember the wolves. Remember the harvests. Remember that history is not just about the battles we fight. It is also about the messes we leave behind. And sometimes, those messes feed the future in ways we never expected. If you have got the stomach for more of the dark side of history, hit that subscribe button, because there is a lot more where this came from. Thanks for watching.